Good morning. We'll get started, if that's okay. A couple of things. As we start talking about the parables again, the first 3 weeks of Sunday school, I went over very well-known parables. In fact, some parables that Jesus actually explained. Last week, I went over, I think, what people consider the most difficult parable to understand, the parable of the dishonest or shrewd manager. And then this week, another difficult one to understand, even though the meaning, I think, is fairly clear. We don't like it. And I'll tell you a little bit where people don't like which parts. And maybe it's just me, but the parable of the talents. So let's get started, okay? Now let's do a little bit of review of last week. If you go on to the next one, the shrewd manager. What was that all about? Because there's some stuff in there, in particular, if you remember, where the person in charge commends the shrewd manager for being dishonest. That's a tough one because we like to think that that person is always going to be Jesus or God, that person in charge, and that wasn't the case because we got a comparison here. People of the world, people of light, whatever that means. And I think the moral of the story, if we look at it in those terms, because when David was speaking this morning, if you've already heard him, if you haven't, you have something to look forward to. He made a distinction about what parables were, absolutely wonderful. Exaggerations to prove a point. As we'll learn in particular about this, and I think one of the reasons that Jesus made such huge exaggerations was to tell people, listen to the point, it's not a real story. It's a story to prove a point. We're not talking necessarily actual events. Get the point. And so, for the shrewd manager, what was the point? Well, for me, this is just for me now. What's important for the people of light? And how do we look at the world, people of the world, and how do we look at us? Because if there's no distinction, there's something going on. Something going on with me, something going on with you. And then, one of the biggest points, I think, of the shrewd manager, what's your wealth all about? Because I don't care what your wealth is on a comparative basis with another person, because of where you live. The United States, you have extreme wealth, extreme compared to much of the rest of the world. What is your wealth all about? Because Jesus slammed that point home. You can't serve both God and money. You can't have one foot in one and one foot in the other. It doesn't work like that. So what's your wealth all about? Because certainly Jesus did not talk about wealth as being a bad thing. The love of it. And then, who is Jesus talking to? Certainly, he was talking to his disciples. He always does. And in particular, he was doing this to the Pharisees, because Jesus's biggest consternation were the Pharisees, the people who upheld the law, the people from the very beginning when the laws were given. If you go back to Old Testament history, that tribe of Levi were tasked with all these things to keep the law and serve the people. And Jesus had a real hard time with what they were doing. So let's move on. Okay, you know me with the past few weeks, with the parables that we've been talking about, I want to know at what point in Jesus' ministry, who is he talking to, where is he, and who's listening? He's in Jerusalem. Actually, he's been in Jerusalem and he stepped away, and now he's at the Mount of Olives. It's very, very late in his ministry. He's already gone through that triumphal entry where he's come into the city and people have laid the palms down and shouted Hosanna and basically crowned him king. And it has made the Pharisees, Sadducees, the teachers of the law really nervous, extremely nervous, because what they don't want are crowds. They don't want crowds because crowds uprise. And the Pharisees, Sadducees are tasked by Rome to make sure this does not happen. I wish you'd look at it in just a little bit different light, because the Pharisees and Sadducees, for the wrong reasons, thought they were doing the right thing. We have got to get rid of this Jesus. They're already started to plot to kill him. But they are not going to do it during the Passover, or the crowds might riot. They aren't going to do it. They're going to wait until afterwards. So we're in the Passover, okay? Or very close to it. Keep going. And this time, if we look at the passage, and it only comes from Matthew, which I think is fascinating. You take a look at the disciple Matthew. Who was he? In his former life, who was Matthew? He's a tax collector. He's a money man. He understood money very well. And so when we get the parable of the talents, put the two together just a little bit. And so he's talking this time to just his disciples and followers. That's what it says. It's not the Pharisees, Sadducees. It's not the crowd. He's gone to the Mount of Olives to be alone. This is late in his ministry. He wants to be with his core group because there are a lot of things, at least in my mind, there are a lot of things he wants them to know. He wants them to know. So before and afterwards, he's talking about when he comes again. Realize that when he talks about coming again is who they want Jesus to be. Think about this triumphal entry right now. They want him to be the King of Kings who gets rid of that Roman rule. They've seen his power. They've seen his miracles. They have all but crowned him king. And that's who they want. They want Jesus to be his second coming, to be his first. And Jesus is talking about his second coming in very stark terms. Before, he talks about end times before this. Afterwards, if we have an opportunity, depending on how long this goes, I want to talk about another difficult passage, which is the passage of the sheep and goats. It comes right after the parable of the talents, and it is scary. When he talks about the parable of the sheep and goats, it is pointed and it is scary. Here's what I want, here's what I do not want. Okay? And it talks about such a definite separation. He is telling his disciples, there's going to be some separation here. And when you listen or have listened to David speak today, he addresses that issue. So here we go. Let's move on into it, okay? In other versions, now I've done the amplified version, right, Dodie? That's what I've got. You know, sometimes I like the Message, but the Message waters this passage down. I don't like how the Message waters it down because, again, Jesus is into hyperbole, these fantastic stories to prove a point, to tell a truth, to say, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. This is who God is. This is who I am. This is what I want you to do. But it's through story form. For it is like, and some passages will say, and again, I tell you, piggybacking on what he just previously said, which was a lot of passages about the end times. For it is like a man who was about to take a journey, and he called his servants together and entrusted them with his possessions. Who's going to take the journey? I would ask you to consider Jesus talking about himself. I'm going away. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability, and then he went on his journey. Now here's hyperbole. A talent was equal to about 20 years' wages for a day laborer. This is a phenomenal, fantastic amount. And for a person to get 5, that's 100 years' wages. It's an incredible amount that he or she has been given, even to the one who gets 2. That's 40 years' wages. To the one who gets 1, it's still a fantastic amount. And this is where I have a hard time a little bit with a Message, because the Message seeks to put it in more understandable terms. So it takes $5,000, $2,000, and $1,000, and that's not the issue here. The issue is the amount. All right, so here we go, verse 16. The one who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made a profit and gained 5 more. And I think I can tell you that the disciples would have gone, that's great, but I would not have done that. Why not? To double your money that wasn't yours? You have been entrusted with all this money, 100 years' wages to go out and double it would have been crazy. Talk about speculation on the stock market, if any of you were into that. Unbelievable. And even the one who had 2, likewise, the one who had 2 made a profit and gained 2 more. But the one who had received the 1 went and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. And if this parable were just about money, I think the disciples and maybe some followers would have gone, oh yeah, that's what I would have done. Why? Because it's not my money. When I come back to and give it back to my master, I want to make sure it's still there. So the parable isn't about money. It's about something else. And Jesus gives us, I think, a little bit of insight into it. Let's keep going. Yeah, 20 years' wages. Think about what your average wage was. And not everybody in this room made the same yearly wages. So, is Jesus saying people are given different things? We're going to talk about that. But let's say it was $50,000. It's $1 million. 20 years' wages. Which would equate now to $5 million. Someone hands you $5 million. Would you go speculate with it? Because the chances of you doubling it, if this truly were money, few and far between. Stock market would have to be right. Things would have to be right. You'd have to know exactly what you were doing. Let's keep going. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. He's talking about coming back. And the one who had received the 5 talents came and brought him 5 more, saying, Master, you entrusted me 5 talents. See, I have made a profit and gained 5 more talents. It worked out. Keep going. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful and trustworthy. 2 different words. You have been faithful and you have been trustworthy. Notice what the master, Jesus, says to the servant. You have been faithful and you have been trustworthy over a little. And I'm thinking, $5 million? You've been trustworthy over a little? This is not a little amount. But that's what Jesus says. You have been faithful and trustworthy over a little. I will put you in charge of many things. Share in the joy of your master. What does that mean? Share in the joy of your master. Because many people will tell you that means you're now in the kingdom. But he also says to him, you're going to be given more. What does that mean for the journey, for the destination? It's really cool, I think. Also, the one who had 2 talents came forward saying, Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I've made a profit and gained 2 more talents. Notice they weren't given the same amount, but they did the same thing with it. They weren't given the same amount, but they did the exact same thing with it. They doubled it. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful and trustworthy. Says the same exact thing to him. Over a little. This is still not a little amount. That's what Jesus says. I will put you in charge of many things. Many things. Share in the joy of your master. Let's keep going. And here we go. Here's the person who the disciples would have been if this had just have been money. The one who had received 1 talent also came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a harsh and demanding man. Who's the master? Jesus. And the servant said, I knew you to be harsh and demanding. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Reaping the harvest where you did not sow. And I am so glad that Jesus explained the parable of the sower, because now we know. Reaping a harvest where no one has heard the word. We can do that because Jesus explained the parable. And gathering where you did not scatter seed. That's scary enough. So I was afraid to lose the talent, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what's yours. You have what you had entrusted to me. Here it is back. But the master answered him, you wicked, lazy servant! Exclamation mark. You knew that I reaped the harvest. Jesus did not contradict him at all. In fact, he verified his claim. You knew that I reaped the harvest where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter seed. You knew that. I'm not denying it. Then you ought to have put my money with the bankers, and at my return, I would have received my money back with interest. At least you could have done this. But what would have been shocking to all the listeners there is what Jesus said next. Keep going. So take this talent away from him and give it to the one who has 10. Notice, the talent doesn't go away. It's given to the one who's already got, who's doubled. Why is that? For to everyone who has and values his blessings and gifts from God and has used them wisely, this is why I went to the Amplified. We're not talking about money anymore. We're talking about values his blessings and gifts and use them wisely. More will be given, and he will be richly supplied so that he will have an abundance, but from the one who does not have because he has ignored or disregarded his blessings and gifts from God, even what he does have will be taken away. And throw out the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place of grief and torment, there will be weeping over sorrow and pain and grinding of teeth over distress and anger. Jesus is really clear. You didn't use it. I lavishly gave it to you. And I can stand up here and say lavish because a talent was worth so much. I lavishly gave you a huge amount of blessings. And I lavishly gave you a huge amount of what else? Gifts. Yeah. One person had 5, another 2, and another 1. It did not matter, which we'll do a little bit next week when we talk in the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Jesus never goes off topic. But here we go. I gave you all this, and you didn't use it. Notice what he talks about. Send that worthless servant to hell. Oh. So what's up with all this? And what did he want his disciples to know and remember? Let's keep going. You see, I think this is a very true statement. Our theology of God will greatly impact how we experience God. Notice those first 2 servants, the one with the 5 and the one with the 2. How did they see the master? They went out and did something absolutely wild to double that money. They used their gifts lavishly, like they had been given lavishly. And they doubled what they had and were commended for it. But notice the third person with the 1 talent. And I don't think the 1 talent is the key here. He was only given 1 because that's what he had. It could have been, to me, the 5 who buried it, or the two who buried it. It was a fact of burying it that was the key. But notice how that third person viewed God. I knew you were. What kind of God? Which, by the way, Jesus didn't deny. Because this is what the Pharisees taught as the view of God. Harsh, judgmental. And that's the way this servant viewed God. And so he buried it because he didn't want to offend God. He didn't want to have to deal with this lavishness. And if that's the way you see God, I'm not going to negate it here. This is how you're going to experience God and others. And yes, Jesus talks about judgment here. But first he talks about lavishness, giving us something of huge value. And what are we supposed to do with it? Obviously, it's not bury it. Keep going. We should know the way and heart of Jesus so deeply that managing his resources will be second nature to us. What does that mean? Understand what you've been given. Understand your talent. Understand your gifts. And understand what Jesus wants you to do. Because just like the sower and the seed, just like I've been trying to impress upon you, why the parables? Why the parables? Talking about the kingdom. And I made a statement last week. He wants us there with him. He wants us there. But we're the ones that have been tasked to bring people to that point. And what happens with the talent? And what happens with the gift you've been given if you bury it and don't use it to bring others in? Let's keep going. I'd encourage you to make sure your view of God is healthy. How do you see God? You see him as, which, remember, Jesus did not negate. But that's what the Pharisees were teaching the people. So often, and it's a lot in Matthew. This is Matthew talking. Where Jesus says, you've heard it said. But I tell you, you have heard it said, but I tell you. You have heard it said, but your view of God is not right. So I'm here to tell you, this is who God is. This is what the kingdom is like. Yeah, there's going to be a separation. But let's focus on this. Keep going. Get to know who God made us to be. You know me, those are 4 things that we talk about. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? And is this all there is? Get to know. Because truly, if all I do is focus on myself, I have missed the entire point of the Christian faith. Because that's what happened in the garden with Adam and Eve. When the serpent convinced Eve, and Eve did it, and Adam, that you can make your own decisions here. You're God, not God. Let's keep going. Put your faith into practice. Big thing here. Oh my gosh. We have lots of faith. Yes, yes. I believe. Put your faith into practice. We'll say, what does that look like? It's going to be different for different people. Understand the 5, the 2, and the 1. Differences. And it's okay to have differences. It's okay for some people to have more and some people to have less. It's okay. It's what you do. Put your faith into practice. But here's where the angst, the consternation comes a little bit. Let's keep going. Don't be afraid to take a risk. These people that Jesus was talking about, one with a 5 and 2 and doubled it, it would have included huge risk with great amounts of money. Huge risk. Don't be afraid to take a risk. And you go, what are you talking about? Well, okay, let's keep going. I'd like to go to Ephesians. Take a look. Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Here it is, the lavishness that we were given. Keep going. I'm going from Ephesians 5. I'm skipping around a little. I don't like to do that, but I think these are the verses that we can reference in terms of the talent. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light, for the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Find out. Understand who he is, what he wants. Should be one more. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Understand it. And then, it's more than just head. And this is where I fall so far short, because I am great at the head stuff. The heart stuff is harder for me. Understand what the will of the Lord is, and then do it. With what you have been given, do it. Take a risk. Take a risk. Okay, keep going. Look at this. Chew on this for a minute. Grace is not opposed to effort. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of time. Last week, you sort of fell down on it. I'm going to give you a little bit of time, and I want you to rephrase this. Grace is not opposed to effort. What does this mean? Give you 1 minute. I expect answers. Grace is not opposed to effort. What does this mean? Okay, here we go. Ephesians 2, verse 8 is very clear. For it is by grace you have been saved, not by what? But I just said grace is not opposed to effort. It is by grace you have been saved. Not by works, that anyone should what? Boast. Remember? Get to know God. God opposes. What does he want? Okay? And yet, grace is not opposed to effort. So, here we go. Someone tell me what this is talking about. Take the grace and run with it. Do something with it. What else? Or is that it? Is that perfect? We do the works because of grace. It's from the pastor. It's got to be right, right? Oh, no. It's just, and of course, I didn't keep going in Ephesians 2. You've heard me rattle this off time after time. I just love it. For it's by grace you have been saved, not by your works, so that anyone could boast. For you were created. Oh, I would just so much encourage you to memorize this. For you were created what? The reason you were created was to do good works, and part of the good works is sowing the seeds. Jesus is no longer on this earth. We are. We are here to take a risk. Keep going. Notice, grace is not opposed to effort, but I'm making this statement. Grace is opposed to what? Earning. Keep going. Earning is an attitude. So don't put the next one up, please, Dodie. If earning is an attitude, then what do you think grace is going to be? If earning is an attitude, what do you think grace is going to be here? Because I've got compare and contrast. If earning is an attitude, grace is, oh, go ahead. They don't want to say anything. Effort's an action. If grace isn't opposed to effort, effort's an action. Cool. Keep going. God does not always call us to convenience. Take a look at your own life. What would you like for your own life? And how has that been working out for you? You want a predictable, convenient life. That's why we save so hard for retirement, because we want to predict, because that's where I am. We want a predictable, safe life. Right? And that's not what God calls us to be. Let's keep going. He calls us to be consistent with what? The heartbeat of his kingdom. Understand who God is, what he taught, what he wants from us, and then get in sync with it. Keep going. Is that it? I love the passage. How you view God. How you view God is a direct determinant of how you view yourself and others, and then what you do. I'm going to end today with Bill and Gloria Gaither. Last week I did Buddy Green. Remember the harmonica? Love him. Just love him. But there's a man by the name of Wintley Phipps. And I love the song Amazing Grace. But he's going to give you a little bit of history before he sings that I think is just absolutely wonderful. Hey, how am I doing with time? Perfect. This is great. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. Pretty powerful. So what do we take from all this? I hope that on your drive here today, you looked and saw absolutely stark beauty with a turning of the leaves. And to me, as I keep telling anyone who will listen, you want the most beautiful drive that I have seen. And Carolyn and I have taken a few days this week and gone to see the beauty. We've been in Leelanau, Grand Traverse. There is nothing like there is right south of here. Absolutely gorgeous. My point, you take a look at this broken earth, the beauty that we still have, it is nothing. It is nothing compared to what Jesus is trying to get us to do, and that's come along with him into the kingdom. And he wants us to be the ones as a privilege, not as something that we, oh gosh, I have to do this if I'm a Christian, as a privilege. He wants us to help others do the same and have that attitude. He wants us to have the attitude, not the attitude, I've got mine, that's all I care about. My place in heaven is secure, and I hope for everyone here it is. But he also wants us to have that attitude. I want everybody else to be there also. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, you give us blessings. You give us gifts. You have just absolutely lavishly poured out everything that we need, which is a life with you. Lord, help us to understand who you are and who we are, and the risk that we can take to be lavish with others. Amen. Thank you for being here.